What a great weekend. We smashed things, we killed things.
I want to stomp things, but Hedonism Bot said we can't.
Well, friends, we find ourselves here once again discussing Futurama Season 12. This is Episode 5, otherwise known as One is Silicon and the Other Gold. Gold, Jerry, gold! Now, spoilers lie ahead, so if those aren't for you, take heed. This is your last warning. Let's get talking the episode. Alright, so this one actually kicks off with a bit of a topical reference, which, once again, isn't topical anymore. The Inferno Fest, which is definitely a play on and mocking the Fire Fest situation. However, unlike other topical references Futurama throws in sometimes, I actually think this works, mostly because even if you take it in a vacuum with no references whatsoever to what Firefest actually was, or even anything like that, it is fun enough, it is unique enough, it has enough twists and turns and just funny gags and references that I don't think you need any prior knowledge to Firefest whatsoever to enjoy it as a weird, wacky, futuristic festival these characters are attending. I think it holds up on its own so well that it doesn't really qualify as a topical episode. I also really enjoyed the callbacks to things set up in older episodes of Futurama, so things like the commercial answering Fry's question and being able to buy tickets simply with a thought. Those are things that were basically set up very early on in other episodes, or at least extrapolations of the technology presented in those episodes, and it really worked and it made this feel like a more fleshed out and cohesive universe. Now, along the same lines, but more of an opposite take on that, we get to the book situation. I know I mentioned back in the temp that the fact that people didn't really know what books are or read anymore didn't necessarily jive with prior established Futurama canon, but I didn't actually care whatsoever because this isn't the type of universe where you need to hold steadfastly to such logical canon. It's a humorous animated series. They kind of go back on that again here and have a book club be the prime motivating factor for a lot of the events. Again, I'm not going to let that weigh anything down because it doesn't really matter in the grand scope of things. I just found it interesting that within a couple of episodes, we have two different opposing viewpoints on literature and books in the future, but they don't even clash that much because in this episode, we do follow along Amy's character arc of, ugh, I'm not going to read, that's gross. All that being said, the real meat and potatoes of this episode is a Leela story trying to find friends. And if you look back throughout the history of Futurama, that's seemingly something that's always been kind of simmering in the background and sometimes coming to the forefront. And while it's definitely not something I've sat back and thought about much over the past few years, it was a nice exploration in this episode. But I do need to admit, somewhere around the middle of the episode, my attention did begin to drift and wander a little bit. That's not really saying the episode was horrible. Overall, I do think this was a pretty well-constructed episode. It didn't quite flow the way I hoped it would, and maybe it's just the story wasn't speaking to me as much as some of the earlier elements in the show. I did like some of the stuff at the winery, especially seeing Hedonism Bot brought back into the show and having La Barbara basically calling him on all of his weirdness. That was fun, and that was a nice added element to that character who is definitely, I don't even want to say one note because mostly he's less than one note in every appearance, but that was nice to flesh out the universe a little more. Having Leela develop these friendships was great. Now, I definitely feel like this needs to hold. We need to see her with these friends in future episodes. Now, I'm not saying they need to always be around and always involved, but we need to see that she has these established friendships instead of slipping back to the status quo, because otherwise this episode would mostly be wasted time. And while we're on the subject of new friends, her AI chatbot friend turning out to actually be the one who created this new friend she met in the book club turned wine club, it didn't really feel like a grand twist and a grand reveal. Now, I'm not certain if it was supposed to be, but it really did feel early on like that is what they were setting up. So I can't say it worked as an end of episode twist. It was mostly sitting there looking at your watch, just waiting for when they were actually going to get around to reveal something that was pretty blatantly obviously set up throughout the entire episode. At the end of the day, this was another fair middle-of-the-road episode for this season of Futurama. The last three, this one, the Bugalo episode, and especially the temp, which still holds the honor of being my favorite of this season, are really doing a lot of heavy lifting to keep this season well above the first Hulu revival season, that being season 11. There was a pretty good episode in that season, and so far I wouldn't say we've had a real stellar standout here, but if they can keep this momentum going, I definitely think 12 is going to be much superior to 11. I'm just really hoping when each episode comes along, it's going to be that grand standout, that all-time classic of Futurama, and so far I feel we haven't gotten that. Those are mostly my thoughts. What do you guys think about this episode? Are you watching this season, or do you feel like Futurama should have been left at one of its 13.72 billion series finales we've had in the past? Whatever you think, leave all that down below. Like, share, subscribe, join, do all those YouTube things. But until next time...
Another job well done.